Representative Hudson, we have one more left. Do you want to move House File 765 before the committee? The fiscal note came back with cost, so we will be laying the bill over for possible inclusion. Representative Hudson.
That is my motion, Mr. Chair. So House File 765 establishes mandatory prison sentences and aggravated durational departures and consecutive sentences for certain repeat offenders. So the idea here is that we have to, and we've had this robust conversation, I imagine we're about to have it yet here again in the Public Safety Committee about the role that punitive measures properly ought to play in our criminal justice system. And the argument that this bill is making in its impact is that there is a point past which we have to accept that somebody has bad intentions towards their neighbors, towards society. Once you hit your third violent felony conviction, and each of those words are equally impactful, third violent felony conviction, maybe you need a timeout. Maybe you need to go sit in the corner and wear a dunce cap for a little bit. Think about what you did. That is the impact of this bill, and I'm hoping that I can get support from the members here today.
Representative Hudson, you have testifiers. Would they come to the table, please? Mr. Zimmer, state your full name and begin your testimony when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Novotny and committee members. I'm David Zimmer, Public Safety Policy Fellow with Center of the American Experiment. I'm here today in support of House File 765, which seeks to ensure a more consequential criminal justice system by increasing the length of sentences and ensuring the imposition of mandatory minimum and consecutive sentencing for some chronic and violent offenders. Minnesota has been among the states with the lowest incarceration rates and the highest community supervision rates in the nation, and has been so for decades. Our incarceration rate currently stands at half the national average, and our weak sentencing and correctional policies are failing Minnesotans. While it is true our violent crime rate remains below the national average, it's not 50% lower. Minnesota has struggled with crime since 2020, while the nation has improved. Minnesota's violent crime rate remains 19% higher than it was in 2018. In Minneapolis, for example, the violent crime rate remains 41% higher than just in 2018. But during that same time, the national violent crime rate has decreased by 2.3%. Relevant to chronic and violent offenders, Minnesota is failing badly. According to our Sentencing Guidelines Commission data, we have seen a dramatic increase, not only in the rate of felony cases sentenced, but also in the rate of repeat offenders being sentenced. Simply put, we've experienced an increase in crime, and the increase has involved far too many repeat offenders cycling through our revolving door of justice. Since 1981, Minnesota has experienced a 98% increase in the rate of felony cases sentenced. For person crimes, that rate has exploded by 180%. Between 1981 and 2022, the percentage of felony sentences involving defendants with no prior criminal history points dropped by 47%. During the same period, the percentage of felony sentences involving defendants with 4 or more criminal history points increased by an incredible 285%. So why aren't these chronic offenders incarcerated? Well, one significant reason is our judges continue to depart from presumptive prison commitments at record levels. By literally checking a box labeled amenable to probation, our judges can depart away from presumptive prison sentences as recommended by our sentencing guidelines. In 2023, the rate of those mitigated dispositional departures stood at 42%. In the same year, those same judges recorded a 0% aggravated or upward dispositional departure rate. The fact is, crime has increased in Minnesota over the years. However, our criminal justice system has failed to keep pace, and it has failed to establish a consequential response. Law-abiding Minnesotans are paying the price. House File 765 helps reestablish appropriate consequences for chronic and violent offenders, and I urge you to vote yes on this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmer. Mr. Qualls? State your full name and begin your testimony. Sure.
Kendall Qualls, resident of Medina. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Representative Hudson, for the invitation. I'd like to put this into context as a, again, a citizen resident of Minnesota. And just from a perspective of those that live in the community and how far we've come. In October 2009, Forbes magazine ranked the top 25 cities for their quality of life and the safest city in the country. Of those top 25 cities, Forbes ranked Minneapolis #1. Unfortunately, today, it's not in that, and not even, I don't believe, in the top 25. And then what we have is in January 2nd of 2025 of this year, the Minnesota Reformer released a report, an article that noted that murders plummeted nationwide, but increased in Minneapolis. We have students, and actually I have a son that attends the University of Minnesota, the Carlson School, and a recent attempted carjacking happened with a student, not my son, but a different student, where a bullet went through his windshield for attempted carjacking. Don't know if that was a repeat offender, but I'm sharing this information to tell you how far we've dropped in recent years as a state and as a city. And I encourage you to consider this bill for passage. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for the invitation.
Thank you, Mr. Qualls. I don't believe there are any other testifiers signed up. Members, questions for Representative Hudson? Representative Feist.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just looking online at statistics around crime in Minnesota. And I just don't see, besides the Center for the American Experiment, I don't see other sources reporting similar data. I found this chart about violent crime in Minnesota. This is the 1960s, and it went up in the 1980s, and then it's slowly been going down. We saw the pandemic, and that was obviously a really troubled time for our state and our country. But overall, those trends are pretty good. I found some data from Newsweek, so a national news outlet, that said that we're better off in terms of the violent crime rate than our surrounding states, except for North Dakota is slightly under Minnesota. But we're better than Wisconsin, South Dakota, Iowa. So I just question some of these statistics. I question it also with my life experience. I have a law firm that's in downtown Minneapolis, and I feel safe. So anyway, I just wanted to point out that I don't, we should not legislate from a place of fear and hand waving. I think we really do need to look at the data. And we've had good conversations, and we collectively have had good exchanges over the years about what is the goal of our public safety system, what are the goal of our laws. And one of those goals is to punish. But there are all sorts of goals. There's goals of rehabilitation, because most of the people who are incarcerated are going to get out. And do we want them to get out and be law-abiding, like have a job, be able to support themselves? We also need to look at what people who have been a victim want. And that's not always just, black and white punishment. And then we have to think again, like following the data around what does protect public safety, what reduces recidivism. I'm really excited about restorative justice. I had the honor of being the chief House author of the Veterans Restorative Justice Act my first term, and that's what got me on my kick. And sorry, Representative Mueller always laughs at me because I can't stop talking about restorative justice. But anyway, I just think there are a lot of considerations that we need to have when we're looking at increasing penalties, increasing incarceration, this bill is really focused on punishment, and I just want to look at these types of considerations with a bigger lens.
Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Feist. The old quote, and I don't know who said it originally, but, lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? And that game is played on all sides of sorting through data in order to, with the preconceived intention of presenting a narrative. And I'm not accusing any of the folks who we've cited here today as being guilty of that, but it is something to take into consideration. I think at the heart of it, though, when we're talking about criminal justice, statistics can be important if they reflect accurate data, but it gets too impersonal. We're talking about people. We're talking about victims. We're talking about perpetrators. We're talking about human beings doing things to other human beings that should not be done. And what are we going to do about that? And again, what this bill says is that when you get your third violent felony conviction, we're done. Like, we're not playing anymore. Like, I past that point, I don't know if I care if you ever become a productive citizen, because you have opted out of productive society. Your third violent felony conviction? I don't know how interested I am in making sure you get educated and you get at that point, you're talking about a chronic dysfunction in a person's ability to be a member of society. And past that point, it is the responsibility of those of us who govern society to protect everyone else, to protect everyone who is functional, who isn't harming their neighbor, who isn't violating the rights of others. I'll give you some stats that I know are solid and that from a source that I know you trust. And I won't disclose the particulars of where I got this from, but I think you'll know when I tell you. I had a meeting this week with somebody who works with juveniles. And he presented me a folder that was about as thick as one of our statute books. The documents inside covered the crimes committed by only 6 juveniles. Those 6 juveniles, over the course of the last 18 months, are personally responsible for 174 separate victims. 174 separate human beings, real human beings, whose lives were touched in an inappropriate way by the actions of these kids. That's an average of 29 victims per kid. Now, at some point, our consideration properly should be the 174 as opposed to the 6, right? Like, all the concern of the current trajectory and momentum of our public safety conversation in this state seems to be upon the 6. What do we do about the perpetrators? What do we do to make their lives better? What do we do to put them on the right track? What about the 174 victims who somehow figured it out? They somehow have managed to go through their lives without hurting other people and stealing from other people and harming other people. We're just going to let their rights be violated because we're so deeply concerned about the folks who are perpetrating against them? And look, there is a middle ground. I know I'm getting a little heated because I care about it. There is a bullseye somewhere between the restorative practices and trying to get people back to where they need to be in order to be productive members of society and actually protecting the public from the terrible things that these people are doing. And I would like to think that providing an enhanced penalty for somebody who has 3 violent felony convictions hits right in that bullseye.
Representative Feist. Keep in
Thank you,
mind
Mr.
We have
Chair.
2 more bills to go.
Sorry, we're getting a little bit far afield, but I can't not respond. I'm not necessarily even saying that this bill isn't, hitting that bullseye. I was more responding to the statistics which I thought were misleading. But I do think that now, having had that conversation, that those 6 kids were victims before they were offenders. And so I just need to point that out, that I think that we often approach our public safety in a really black and white way that isn't always the most effective in protecting public safety. So I'll just leave it at that. Thanks.
Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Feist. And sincerely, that is a valuable point and something we do need to continue to work on. There's a balance somewhere in there of, like, the 174 victims. Like, is it their responsibility to endure being victimized because somebody else was a victim? Is being a victim a justification or a rationale for victimizing someone else? I think we all agree it's not. Where compassion meets justice is an ongoing conversation, but I think this bill is a solid step when we say, once you've proven you're not interested in compassion, you get less of ours.
Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I'm just compelled as the only member who serves and lives in Minneapolis. And it's been a while since there's been a Minneapolis member on public safety in the House, to just say we're oftentimes the flogging horse of, in most committees, and we're the biggest city, and we get it, but we should all be invested in the success. I'll say yesterday, there was a good news out of Minneapolis, and when we talk about the statistics, it's helpful to also talk about the good news. Tuesday, the city reported significant decreases in violent crime this year. 47% drops in robberies, 40% decreases in carjackings, 32% fewer shooting victims. Now, like 0. Everywhere in the state, any shooting victim is too many. And that's also why we have to talk about gun violence and the flood of guns on our streets in Minneapolis. We talk about it, I hear about it all the time from constituents. And so I just will say, it is very important that we are talking about, because if we're policymakers and we're talking about how our policies are impacting things, we are looking at both good news and bad news. But let's be clear, guns and shooting and violent crime, guns are as much a part of that as anything. And so having that conversation without talking about guns, to me, sort of doesn't address the problem. But as a Minneapolis member, now I am here to stand up for my city a little bit and say, I hope we can all be invested in improvements and making sure all of those 500,000 people are safe from all of these things.
I didn't hear a question. Representative Hollins.
It's okay, it's okay.
Okay. Lead Moeller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will be brief. I do have one question for Representative Hudson, and I'm curious if any victim advocacy groups have expressed support for this bill.
Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Moeller. I have not engaged with victim advocacy groups. Didn't feel as though it was necessary. This should be relatively non-controversial once you, again, have committed 3 violent felony. You've got convictions on 3 violent felonies. I don't know how much discussion is necessary to determine that that's somebody who should not be on our streets and able to victimize somebody else.
Lead Muller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I just heard victims come up a number of times, and I would be curious to know how they feel, because I know in past years they have said increased penalties is not what they believe. This is the advocacy groups is the answer to solving crime. Victims aren't a monolith, so I'm sure you could find some victims who would be like, absolutely do this. But I do think it's still important, if you're going to say that victims want this, to at least talk to those advocacy groups and hear what their thoughts are around this and other possible solutions. I did just want to reference the sentencing guidelines, because those were referenced earlier as well. Since 1981, the number of felony cases sentenced annually has generally grown from 5,500 cases in 1981 to over 16,000 cases in 2023. And then I'm cutting down what I was going to say. In 2023, the total incarceration rate, the percentage of felony cases in which the sentence included prison or confinement in a local correctional facility was 86% compared to 63% in 1982. And I think we could all agree on both sides of the aisle that what we have been doing isn't working, and I think we need other solutions. I think we need prevention, we need rehabilitation, we definitely need people to be held accountable too, and I'd love to continue working on solutions for all of those things. I just don't think this bill hits the mark.
You want to respond to that before I ask the last question and you close, or?
I think I can respond to it in my close. Go ahead and ask your question.
All right. Representative Hudson, I agree. What we've been doing isn't working, and that's why we work together on this bill. Maybe you haven't had a chance to talk to victims directly, but I've been with you on the corner of 36th and Penn when you did talk to victims and you did have this conversation. If I could remind you about that conversation that we had. And I'll remind you, and we've been not to assault or kick a city that it's down, but one day we picked and we went to 36 and Penn and met with people. And when we got there, they were just taking down the crime seat, the crime tape from one end of the next block over. They were taking down the crime scene tape from a murder that happened there. And we met with some people on the corner. And before I got home, or to my next event, which was actually a fundraiser for Jamal Mitchell in St. Paul, in the time it took me to drive from there to St. Paul, there had been another murder, not 50, maybe 75 feet away from where we had been standing. So we're not trying to pick on any particular place, but in my career in 30 years in Sherburne County, had there been 2 murders within a block in the course of about 4 hours, we would take that very seriously, and there would be changes if it was in Sherburne County or North Oaks or Maplewood. My question for you is, isn't it true that this bill already exists? This bill already exists. It's been on the books. We're changing some technical language in the bill, but your bill would change the statute to basically go from may to must. The guts of the bill is one word, and there's some stuff that follows through it, but it's made a must. Because a long time ago, someone sat probably in this room, took a vote on the floor, and the governor signed it thinking that this was a good idea. And I don't know, we don't have the statistics, but if it gets to the floor, it's something that if you could have ready for me, because I'll ask you this question again when it comes to the floor, is how many times has the current statutes been followed? And I don't expect to have that answer right now, but Representative Hudson, closing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and once again, thank you, members, for the vigorous conversation. I know, Representative Greenman, your comments did not include a question, but I do want to show a little bit of love for Minneapolis. I dig Minneapolis. I worked there for many, many years. I worked at Fairview Riverside. I worked at University of St. Thomas. I worked at Minneapolis College of Art and Design. And I played in Minneapolis, and I had fun in Minneapolis for many, many years. I used to take my kids Macy's downtown, used to have a Santa Land. It was something we looked forward to every year. We would get on the North Star Line. We would have a heavily subsidized trip down to downtown Minneapolis to go see Santa Claus, and it was a lot of fun. What I will tell you is that in talking to the people who live around 36th and Penn, and talking to the organizations who serve them, what I hear time and time again is that there needs to be this bullseye that I'm talking about. It can't just be the services. There also has to be accountability, and not accountability in this vague, let's sit around and talk until you admit what you did type of accountability, but actual punishment as justice administered for the offense you made against another person. And this bill speaks to people who 3 times it has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt that they committed violent felonies against their neighbors. That is worthy of the, as Chair Novotny points out, language of existing statute actually being applied to their sentencing so that we get them off the street. And you know what? After you've been sitting around for a few years, maybe you'll be open to the idea of becoming a better person. And then we can talk about the programming that we're going to implement in order to make that happen. But the programming doesn't work. Another piece of feedback I got from my conversation this week in speaking to somebody who deals with juveniles is the programming's fantastic, but you got to have them in the room. Like, you have to have them, have hold of them in order to have the programming happen. If they can just get up and leave, if they don't care, if they don't want the help, then it's not going to impact anything. And the cumulative effect of this current trend of just continually letting people go and assuming they want to be good people and thinking that it's just that they've been underserved and that's the only reason why they're engaging in crime. When we talk about these statistics, again, lies, damn lies and statistics, I think a lot of what's happening is people aren't reporting crimes. They're just laying down and letting themselves be victimized because they know, just like the criminals know, that nothing's going to be done about it. What's the point of calling the cops? The person's going to be out tonight. How many stories have we heard in this committee room from law enforcement saying, we pick up kids and they know they're going to be out the next day? So this is a common sense bill. I appreciate the conversation, and I ask for your support.
With that, House File 765 is laid over. Thank you, Representative Hudson.